Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman Family JCC empowers you to experience Jewish paths toward a life of joy, purpose, and meaning through innovative Jewish learning and wellness programs, community building, and initiatives to develop the next generation of Jewish leaders. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 362, Love at the Center. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And today, as part of our series Exploring Spirituality, we are so thrilled and honored to have with us one of the most important teachers and explorers in the realm of Jewish spirituality, Shefa Gold. She is an educator, composer, and spiritual leader whose music, teachings, and spiritual methodologies have influenced clergy, lay leaders, and seekers around the world. She is a leading pioneer in modalities of Jewish sacred chant, designed to help communities grow in their connections to one another and individuals to grow into their own spiritual practice. As many longtime listeners will know, I am not always the person who is most comfortable thinking of themselves as spiritual or involved in spiritual practices, but I will tell you that when we recorded this interview, I was immediately downloading Shefa Gold's app called Flavors of Gratefulness. I watched the recordings of her weekly streaming gathering called Kazoom. You can find all of these things at her website, rabbishefagold.com, and I'd really encourage anybody who listens to this episode to explore what she's putting out into the world, which is really quite extraordinary. She is going to be teaching an Unyeshiva class, which is starting in just a few weeks. Our next round of 12-week classes are starting the week of February 5th, and Shefa Gold is going to be teaching a class called The Call of Love, Reimagining Religion with Love at the Center, which is going to be exploring the Song of Songs, which is one of the books of the Bible, but so much more than that. It's going to take place on Tuesdays at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific Time. People who are able to make that time are going to have a great experience, but we also want to remind folks that all Unyeshiva classes are recorded and made available only to people who have registered for the class. So if you are dying to learn more with Shefa Gold, but can't make that time, you can still register for the class and you'll be able to participate via video. So if you are interested in signing up for that class, head to judaismunbound.com/classes. And if you are interested in that class and maybe also some of the other classes, hey, you actually want to study with me or Lex, or you want to study about plant-based Judaism or Jewish languages, we have a great variety of classes there for you to explore. But we think that there are a lot of folks who are going to listen to this episode today and are going to want to register to study for 12 weeks with Shefa Gold in her class called The Call of Love, Reimagining Religion with Love at the Center. And we are thrilled to be able to make that opportunity available to you through the Unyeshiva. Shefa Gold is the author of multiple books, including one that is particularly relevant to this class. It's called In the Fever of Love, an illumination of the Song of Songs. She is also the author of Torah Journeys, The Inner Path to the Promised Land, and The Magic of Hebrew Chant, Healing the Spirit, Transforming the Mind, Deepening Love. Shefa Gold has produced 10 albums of spiritual music, and her chants have been utilized in gatherings all over the world in synagogues, independent prayer communities, summer camps, public protests, and more. If you have been to a Jewish gathering of some kind in the last decade, you probably know some of her chants, but you may not have known that they were her chants. And now you will, especially if you explore her website, her app, and everything that she has available to explore the vastness of the chants that she has created. Shefa Gold is a leader in Aleph, Alliance for Jewish Renewal, and she has rabbinical ordination by both the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College and by Zalman Schachter Shalomi, one of the founders of Jewish Renewal. Shefa Gold currently directs See Deep, the Center for Devotional Energy and Ecstatic Practice. We are so thrilled to be able to explore Jewish spirituality with one of its pioneers. So Shefa Gold, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It is so great to have you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So we're doing this series on spirituality, and a lot of times when people talk about spirituality, I feel like it tends to go exclusively into the place of individual spirituality. And I know that you work a lot with communities, with groups, and I was wondering if you could help us get a little bit of a framing about when we talk about spirituality, how to distinguish the individual experience of spirituality and a group experience of spirituality, and how do those two connect to one another in your work, in your experience?
I think the way that it connects is that I'm working always with the quality of my own presence, and that the quality of that presence is going to allow me to work with a group, to be effective in the world in terms of social change. But if I'm not working on the inner dimensions, then whatever comes out of me is not going to be refined or balanced. And so I want to open up these channels within me so that I can bring forth the highest place in me and not the most triggered. And also, when I'm in leadership, it means that I have a responsibility to have a daily practice, ways to connect in to my own depths and possibilities. That needs to be an ongoing and dynamic developing practice in my life. And when I have that, then I have some place to call on when I am in leadership.
I want to back out a little bit because when I first heard, and I say this because I think this might be others' experience, I knew your name, Shefa Gold, as, oh, she wrote that melody for, I think it was probably Ozi Vizimrat. Yeah, I now know many of your chants. That might have been the first one I knew. But once I spent more time with you and I took a class with you for an entire week, and calling it a class is a little bit of a simplification. It was a class, it was an experience, it was a lot of chant together, learning together, many things. But what became clear to me is I don't think it's right to distill you to like, oh, you're a person who wrote melodies. You have a methodology, you have a way of bringing groups together that is important and I think missing in a lot of Jewish spaces, such that people could maybe use your melody for a synagogue service or whatever, but they might not be fully soaking into your methodology. And so I'm kind of curious to hear from you, when you lead or participate in groups of people that are chanting sacred music with one another, what do you do? And what looks maybe a little different when you're creating spaces like that than when others might be?
It's very important to me to distinguish between a chant and a song. A chant is a practice. It has 3 parts to it. It has the part before I even begin, I am building an intention, and I am tuning into possibilities. It has the chant itself, a practice of raising energy, making beauty, becoming a creative force. And then there's the silence afterwards, in which the effect of the chant really unfolds. And as a leader, I want to bring attention to what is the medicine of the chant. How am I different at the end of the chant than I was before? And it's not just a melody. So I can give you the example of that you raised of Ozi Vizimrat. Yeah, I wrote that as a practice that I called balancing will and surrender. When I saw that sacred phrase in the Tanakh, in the sacred literature, what I saw was that it was a formula. It said Ozi, and the word Ozi means my strength, but it also refers to kind of my effort, my will, my power. And then it says, and Vizimaratia, which is the song of God, which refers to the quality of surrender, of allowing, of opening to God's song that is singing me. And those are 2 different qualities. And then it says, Vayihi li lishua. When those 2 are in perfect balance, that will be my salvation. That's what's going to save me in this world, when I can do the work of both calling up my strength and also opening and surrendering to something larger than me. So sometimes I'll sing those words as a kind of a diagnostic to see, oh, do I have a little too much will today? Or am I surrendering too much today? And how do I bring those qualities into balance? And that's what I was saying, is that the quality of my presence is going to determine both what I create in the world and what I perceive of the world.
So for folks who don't know, like me, I mean, I haven't taken a class with you. When you talk about a chant as opposed to a song or as opposed to a prayer, how do we make those distinctions?
When I was in rabbinical school and I kind of like encountered the liturgy and the texts, and I was totally overwhelmed, I had this sense that like, oh, if I could only take one little bit at a time, then I could work with it, And I have the rest of my life to do that. And I'm more interested in depth than saying all the words. And so what I've been doing in my life really has been taking one phrase at a time. I began this journey, but with just the words Moda ani lefanecha, the first words in the liturgy, the words of gratefulness when I wake up in the morning. And so I just decided, okay, I'm going to take those words and I'm going to explore them. And a chant is something, because of its repetition and because of the awareness that I bring to it and the intention that I bring to it, it's meant to be a transformative practice. I want to be a different person at the end of the chant than I was at the beginning. And so the very first chant that when I was, finding that, I was singing, Moda ani lefanecha, Moda ani lefanecha, Moda ani lefanecha. So I noticed there's three phrases in the chant. I brought an intention so that the first time I chant it, I'm saying thank you for the past of everything that's ever happened to me. And then when I say it a second time, I'm sort of turning to the future and saying to God, thank you for everything you're going to give me. I'm going to open to it in gratefulness. The third time is kind of this bowing into the present moment and really, opening to the truth of now and gratefulness. It becomes a process, really, because when I begin it, I'm not there yet. And with every chant, I may need to do it, 5-10 minutes before it even begins to open up for me. Whereas when you go to a synagogue and they sing a song, a couple times through, that's enough. Let's go on to the next thing because there's so many other things we have to say. It's a methodology of going deep and really opening up this inner capacity and sensing that whoever wrote these prayers, they were in a different state of consciousness, and I'm going to use those words in order to get to that place.
Well, just in the hour or so before we started this interview, I was listening to a bunch of the chants that you have on your website. And honestly, it was the best synagogue-adjacent experience that I've had in a very long time. Meaning, I guess I'm asking whether there's a critique of prayer that is implicit here. And what is that critique? I mean, it feels to me like the way that most of us have experienced Jewish prayer in institutional settings like a synagogue, it's almost the opposite of what you're describing. It's that we have to get to everything and we've got to go fast because there's just this incredible amount of material that we have to cover each and every Shabbat. And as a result, it feels to me, at least for me, speaking for myself, almost none of it really hits. And then my question is, what have I accomplished over these 3 hours as opposed to even maybe 5 minutes that I might have spent with one of your chants and gotten a more spiritual experience than that whole 3 hours. So is there an implicit critique, or is there something that we should be taking with this approach and saying we really should be doing some major surgery on the experience of Judaism?
I hesitate to make any kind of critique. I think that my way of living my life is to do what works for me. Going to a synagogue often doesn't work for me, because I need to move my body. I need to dance. And often that's not like so cool in a synagogue. I can't sit there. And I can't say so many words. And I need some silence as well. So I'm looking at the tradition as a great treasure house that I can pull from in order to find these tools or medicine. I call them medicines that are going to be tools of transformation that are going to bring me to a more open, loving, less judgmental state. So I'm making that path for myself, and then I invite anybody else who resonates with it. Hey, you want to come with me on this journey? One of the, I think that useful kind of articulations of what prayer can be was through this project through an Institute for Jewish Spirituality called the Prayer as Practice Initiative. And it came from the realization that having a practice, like say if you have a yoga practice or if you have a meditation practice, there are certain things about a practice where you need a teacher, you know that you're on a kind of a road of development with it, of deepening. And prayer is also a practice, but it's not often seen that way. It's seen as like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to services. And so if I was going to go to, I could imagine going to a synagogue and saying, okay, we're going to practice now. And we're going to use these prayers in order to do our practice of prayer. And the practice of prayer is really, it's the preparation of consciousness for the God experience, clearing away some of my busy mind, connecting to the deepest yearnings of my heart, finding a way to inspire myself, to lift myself up. I have an app that's called Flavors of Gratefulness that has 109 different melodies for Moda Ani to explore what gratefulness is. And then I'm on my website, which I hope is eventually will become an app, is Flavors of Praise, because I realized that Hallelujah is one of the most amazing prayers there is. And every day I get up and I sing Hallelujah to some different melody. And it opens me up in a way that's even, kind of different than gratefulness. So, and sometimes I'll wake up and I won't feel so great. I'll be in a bad mood. I'll go out on my porch and I'll just start singing, Hallelujah, 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 Hallelujah. And so maybe if I sang that for 10 minutes, I would be in a different place after that 10 minutes and much more able to sort of deal with the challenges in front of me.
I seriously would actually be interested in you doing that for 10 minutes on the podcast. We probably shouldn't do it, but it would be an amazing experience.
Yeah. Bonus episodes to come, everyone. No, so when I learned with you for that 1 week, the idea of prayer as practice is one of those pieces that stuck with me. And for me, what that meant was important, because the question I always ask when people talk about spiritual practice, like for me, the first ever association I had with the word practice was sports. Like I had soccer practice, and then there would be the soccer games. So spiritual practice, one of the questions that comes to me is, if soccer practice is to practice for the game, what is a prayer practice for? And I think there's a positive side of that question, which is like, what do I want to be using this moment to achieve as my inner work, as the work I can do to better myself? I also think there's a danger to that question, because it makes every prayer, every act of a practice like an instrument. It makes it only useful towards achieving some goal in the future, as opposed to being valuable in and of itself. So I'm kind of curious to hear more from you about practice. But from that class, what stuck with me is that it's not just that we would chant with one another. We engaged with your idea of 8 functions of spiritual consciousness in a spiritual group. And what those basically are 8 different roles that one can fulfill in a context of sacred community, often through sacred chant, but I've actually applied it to communities in my life that are not about chanting, but ways that you can take a more louder, ostentatious role, ways that you can take a quieter role of leadership, ways you can take all sorts of different roles. And we would each day actually inhabit one of those roles. And since then, I don't always remember. I would be lying if I said I always remember. But when I do remember, and I'm in spiritual contexts of various kinds, I've tried to consciously say, I'm going to be Secret Heart today. That's one of the names of the group of your function. I'm going to be the guide. I'm going to try to opt into a role and see what that does for me in this moment, and also what that can do for me in the world, because I encounter people all the time in life. And what is it if I encounter those people not just as random individuals, but as like a potential, I don't know, spiritual partner? Maybe that gets a little...
Yeah, no, we're all collaborating.
Right. And so can you talk to us about those 8 functions of spiritual consciousness? And maybe if you have a little more on that practice word, but those 2 framings.
Well, the way that the 8 functions of consciousness emerged was because I was very curious about when a spiritual experience in a group really worked. I wanted to say, well, why did it work? And I noticed that there were these different components that were all there at once. And so there was the empowerer, meaning like a quality of energy that channels strength and power into the group. If somebody is doing that function, we all have more energy. And there's another that's called the container, that a kind of sense of being held, and using our imagination and intention to sense that there is a container that we're doing this in. And when we can lean back into that container, everything kind of takes off. There's another function called the exalter, which looks for what is what is beautiful and lifts it up and celebrates that. And there's another one that's called the foundation, and the one that, how do we create the dance floor on which to dance? All of these functions, I want to learn how to do all of them, because in leadership, they all need to be there. And what I noticed as I would travel to different communities, I would say, oh, hey, everybody's doing the exalter and nobody's doing the foundation here. It's not going to work. Mm-hmm. Or everybody's doing the foundation. There's nobody exalting. It's really just looking into it and seeing like everyone is powerful. You have an effect on the energy of the group. You may think you are just watching what's going on, but you are making what's going on. It's a different model of leadership that takes all of that pressure off the perceived leader and says, we're all here to create something together.
Dan and I recently, we were speaking about actually Jewish weddings, and I was naming that I believe everybody there, I have like an allergy to the word audience when I'm talking about most life cycle events, but especially weddings, because I think nobody's an audience. Like wedding couples choose very carefully who is there. It's not like, even a bar mitzvah, a really important life cycle event, like there's people that are invited and there's also others that are part of the community that are there because it's their synagogue or whatever. With a wedding, every single person that's there was chosen carefully. And even if you're not standing up, quote unquote, I'm not, standing up in the wedding. If you're in the kahal, if you're in the congregation, you are playing a role. You are like, I'm not stretching anything. You have been chosen to be a witness, even if you're not signing that document of the ketubah.
And I want to say you could either play that role deliberately or accidentally. What I'm trying to teach everyone is that bring some deliberateness to the role that you play. And you do that by realizing the power of your own presence. There's always a paradox in spiritual work that we are doing this work and we're already there. We're on a journey and we've already arrived. Right now, I'm working with this idea of bringing love to the center of my life and love to the center of Judaism. And so I have an intention of bringing love to everything that I do. And then I find that I can't do it all the time that there's, in order to bring love to everything that I do, there's some work that I need to do inside me. There's some healing. There's some clearing away of obstacles. There's some meeting my resistance. That becomes the work of love. And in order to do that work, I need a practice. So the practice is what helps me to do the work that needs to be done. In the book that I wrote that's called Torah Journeys, it's a way of looking at a sacred text that asks 3 questions. What is the blessing here? What is the spiritual challenge that I'm being given? And what is the practice I need in order to rise to the spiritual challenge in order to receive the blessing? And when I wrote that book, it was a way of entering Torah. And then I realized that's just actually how I want to live my life. I know there's a blessing here, and yet there's a spiritual challenge that I'm given in each moment. And then I look and I say, well, what's the practice that I can do to rise to the spiritual challenge so that I can receive the blessing that God is trying to give me right now? So it's a different way of looking at practice. And you can almost say it's avodah, or work, that there's work that needs to be done. And I want to approach that work in not a tedious way, but a joyful way, that like, here's the work.
As I'm listening to you talk about this, I'm thinking, like, what would it be like to live as a Jew this way? You know, what would I be doing when I woke up in the morning in order to center myself more on love? And then what would I do to manifest that in the world? And how would all of that be framed as my Jewish practice?
Yeah. A couple years ago, I really received this revelation, guidance, instruction that the Song of Songs needed to be at the center of a Jewish path. When Rabbi Akiva kind of saved the Song of Songs from the trash heap, he said it was the Holy of Holies. To say something is the Holy of Holies means it needs to be at the center. And when it's at the center, everything else looks different around it. And he also said that had we not been given the Torah, we could live our lives by the Song of Songs. And I was totally intrigued of like, how might I do that? So the instruction that I got was to divide the Song of Songs into 52 parshiot, into sections, and to study, immerse, chant, and live by each of those parshiot of Shir HaShirim, of the Song of Songs, and to ask kind of the questions that, okay, not only this is what it means, but how do I live it? So for every week, there's a chant, there's a commentary, there's a bridge to the Torah portion, and there's a question for contemplation. And so I spend the week really exploring that theme that the Song of Songs is giving me, which is one aspect of love. So when I was first stepping onto this part of the path of love, I went to a labyrinth near my house, and I walked the labyrinth with the question asking, how do I step onto the path of love? And as I was walking out of the labyrinth, I heard these words. I heard the words that said, well, can you bring love to everything you do? And it was not like a commandment. It was just kind of a curious question. Can you bring love to everything you do? And I got home and walked into the house, and there was a pot in the sink that my husband and I were both hoping that the other person was going to wash because it was really grimy. But I had that question in my heart of like, well, can you bring love to everything you do? And I went and I washed that pot with that intention. And I have been keeping that question with me every day. Can I bring love to everything I do? And what would that mean? And it doesn't mean that I succeed in it, but that is my intention. And the Song of Songs is what helps me to do that. The Song of Songs is an entranceway into the mystery of love. And each verse is a doorway that I can enter through and open to a different aspect of love. So the very first words of Song of Songs is Yishakeni Michikot Pihu, which is he kisses me with the kisses of his mouth. And when I encounter those words, what I receive is that I am sent to the challenge of intimacy with my own experience. Because, God is not some guy out there. God is all of reality who wants to kiss me. And so my stance in life needs to be one that is puckered up to receive that kiss and to respond to that kiss. And so that verse then sends me on a path towards intimacy. Intimacy meaning that I'm not just standing back from life and watching it happen. I'm engaging with it and I'm receiving love. I'm receiving it and I'm responding to it. And I'm raising myself up as a lover. Any name of God, it's all a metaphor. But when we use the metaphor of lover and beloved, it sends us on a path of entering into a relationship with life. So if we're talking about God as judge, then I'm going to be the one who is judged. And if we're talking about father or mother, then I'm going to be the child. And if we're talking of God as beloved, then I need to become the lover. How do I do that? And so then I'm given what my work is to clear the channel so that I can be a channel for that love to move through me.
When you talk about this, and also back to what we were talking about in terms of chant and in terms of Judaism being more about fewer things and more repetition, really, in other words, like you said, going deep and not worrying about covering everything every time and seeing it more as a life work is how I understood it. It feels to me like there are certain kinds of Jews that might find that challenging. And I'm curious what your experience has been in helping Jews who have grown up with a different idea about what it means to express and to be a Jew, how they can move in the direction that you're talking about, or is it sort of like generally they don't, and the people who are attracted to the way that you're framing the Jewish experience are people who are coming from a different direction? I mean, specifically, I'm thinking about people who grew up like me in a more observant setting, and I'm not anymore, but there's something in me that often feels this sense that is how I was raised, that, well, we have to do all these things. And if we were to only do a few things, it might be an incredible experience, but somehow there's something even like in my gut that feels like, but we have to do this other thing too, don't we? And so I find myself extremely attracted to what you're talking about, and also feeling like I would have these shmilkas about it, and all the more so people that are still kind of inside of that thinking about Judaism. So that's like one category. And the other category is people who might not really see themselves as a theist in a self-conscious way. And yet everything that you're talking about is extremely moving and meaningful. How do people relate to it when they don't have a sense of God as a being and find it hard to relate to those sorts of ideas?
So I'm not putting forth a theology. What I'm doing is saying what works. If saying all those words really works for you, then say them. For me, it doesn't work. There's certain measures that I have in my life. I want to become more loving and less judgmental. I want to feel more connected to the whole cosmos and less separated. And so I want to always be looking at my practice to saying, well, is this working? And if not, maybe I need to tweak it some. Is it working to make me a better partner, to my beloved? There was one time when I was in Jerusalem, I was studying in a yeshiva, I was studying Talmud, and I came home to my then husband, who said to me, you're a lot more argumentative since you started studying Talmud. And I had to look and say, oh, is that who I'm learning to be? And so just even asking the question, is it working, is a first step. And what does that mean? What do you want the prayers to do? And God for me is the great mystery. I want to be always in relationship to that mystery. It's not about finding an answer. It's about holding questions each day that's going to move me on my path towards being more awake, more present, more loving.
Right. And one of the things that I've experienced is that I feel like a lot of your incredible chants are actually used in various synagogues, but they're not used instead of the prayers. They're used in addition to the prayers. And so then it just becomes more. And it doesn't seem like it functions the way that you're trying to advocate for these things to function, that it doesn't work that way, right?
Yeah, I have no control over what anybody does with my staff. But, the whole idea of creating a practice that's beautiful is that it's compelling and I'll want to do it. And so when I go out on my porch and sing hallelujah, I get caught up in the beauty of the melody, and it opens my eyes to what's in front of me. And it changes the quality of my presence. I'm not so much in my head. I'm opening, I'm relaxing, I'm connecting with my heart. I'm inspiring myself. Often when I'm chanting, I say, there's one part of me chanting and the other part needs to hear that chant. The part of me that's chanting is that one little piece of me that is awake, and it's chanting to the other parts of me that might be resistant, might be sulking in the corner, might be angry and hard. And so the chant then gets to soften my edges and bring me into a place of integration.
We've used the word services, all of us, in this conversation. And Marcia Prager, who is another teacher of mine from the Jewish renewal world, she talks regularly about the difference between services as a noun and serving as a verb. And for me, my goal number one is not always to serve God, but my goal often is to serve communities I'm a part of and to serve society that I'm a part of. And it brings me back to the 8 functions of spiritual consciousness. I want to get kind of specific here, which is there's 8 different ways that you describe being while in a community of people of collective purpose. And what I found beneficial about the experience of being in your class is I was asked a couple times to take on roles that are not my natural role. I'm a loud guy, including in prayer communities. I am comfortable singing. I'm ready to clap. I'm ready to dance. I'm ready to do all that. But sometimes when I lean into that role, I said secret heart first before. That's the role I said first, because I have specifically taken on that role consciously a number of times to push myself not to be that kind of a loud leader, but instead, when you describe secret heart in the Word document I have on my computer that I regularly consult, it says the least known part to outsiders. Mm-hmm. And so I'd kind of love to hear...
it's surrendering to the depths, that you are surrendering to your depths on behalf of the group in order to bring the whole group into a deeper place.
Yeah, and surrender's hard for me. And so I did serve. I served that group, and I did so I have been in the groups where everybody is trying to sing the best harmonies and trying to, I've been in those where you describe, maybe you've got everybody being the foundation or everybody being the guide or whatever it is. And I guess I'd love to hear from you a little more, what are those different roles that we can play in spiritual contexts? And what are the benefits of pushing ourselves to take on roles that aren't our natural instincts?
Before you take on any roles, you look into the group and you say, what is needed here? You're looking into and saying, oh, it really needs some grounding or some deepening. And so I'm going to serve this community by bringing what is needed, which is a whole different attitude than consumerism of what can I get? But it begins with the question of what is needed here. The transformation that I went through was that I would come, in earlier times of my life, I would go to a community and I would just say, oh, this sucks, or I don't like this, or this is, there's no energy here. And I would have my critique. And when I discovered this other way of being in a group, I saw that any group that I come into, I can be an essential part of, and I can bring what is needed instead of critiquing what's not there. And that felt very empowering and uplifting to me, in a sense that I could be useful wherever I go rather than critical of what's happening.
What is it to go into a community and actually, I don't want to call it detective work, but sleuth out what's needed? I think in the abstract, of course, whatever's needed in a particular spiritual community, many of us would want to fill that gap. I have worked on my skills over the years to try and figure that out. Sometimes literally I'm like, this is working in many ways, but there needs to be a drum beat. It's not always about the literal sound that's missing, but sometimes being a drum beat on a prayer book can do a lot. Other times it's different. What is it to actually identify the gap or what you could fill in a spiritual community?
It means reading the energy. I tell my students, you need to close your eyes to be able to see what's really happening. It can be different than what you see. And there's a sense inside my heart where I can feel what's going on in the group, where it's going, where it's not going, where it needs to be lifted up, where it needs to be grounded. And so I'm feeling into the group, and then I'm saying, okay, I'm going to bring my presence in a way that's going to be useful to this group. Because it's possible someone could do that surrender, and so it's a kind of a generosity and a willingness to collaborate energetically with a group. I remember one day I walked into a party, and the party was the energy was so kind of wild and kind of jagged that I thought, oh, something bad's going to happen here. That's what the energy felt like. And I said, I'm going to do the Secret Heart at this party. I mean, I still was there with people, but part of me was in that surrender to my own depths place on behalf of the people at the party.
To me, that's so important, because what you're describing there is you are practicing, to use that word practice again, in a group that's chanting together. It's not just that you're doing it in that, you are actualizing that in another context in your life. And I don't want to imply that the chanting on its own wouldn't matter, but I think that when it is channeled into that kind of a situation, like a party, this is changing us. This is making us be differently. And I strive one day to be so conscious when I'm in a group contest that I really notice what you did and like, I'm going to be Secret Heart now. I think I'm better at that in prayer contexts so far. So I guess I'm asking, like, what sort of there's pure math and applied math, right? What if there were pure chant and applied chant? What is applied chant?
I'll just give the example of this week's Song of Songs chant, and Parsha is a practice that I call blossoming forth and rooting down. These are two qualities of presence that I want to cultivate in my life. And so the words say, Ani chavatzelet hasharon shoshanata amakim. Just literally, it just says, I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys. But when I look at that verse, I see that there's two parts to it. And this, I am this rose of Sharon, I am this flower that is blossoming forth. And then that Shoshanata Amakim, sometimes it's translated as the rose of the depths, because that word Amakim doesn't just mean valleys, it also means depths. And so what it's pointing me towards is that I want to cultivate two qualities of presence, the blossoming forth, which means opening, expanding, reaching out into the heavens, becoming sort of beautiful, inspired. And then there's this other part of it that says, Shoshanata Amakim, I want to root down into my lineage, into my body, into my earthiness, into the resource that's deep, deep within me. And I want to bring that up and make it available in my life. So when I do this practice, I'm chanting it, I'm making these words, embodying those words. But what I'm doing is I'm reminding myself of those two qualities so that I can live them. I can see how might I blossom forth? How might I root down? How are those related? And it becomes just the whole incredible exploration of presence. I'll sing those words. Ani chavatzelet hasharon shoshanat hamakim. Ani chavatzelet hasharon so I might follow that chant with a breath exercise where I breathe into my heart. And then as I exhale, I open up and breathe out and flower forth, just blossom. And then breathe back into my heart. And on the next exhale, I would breathe down into my depths. And on the next inhale, I would bring all of that resource of the depths back up into my heart. And in that way, I'm embodying the phrase, I'm living it. And, and the question that I am contemplating, it's giving me this question. And the question says, can I stay rooted in my depths, in my lineage, my body, and my earthiness, while reaching towards the heavens and the great expanse? And so the Song of Songs is sending me to that kind of a commitment to expanding into the full breadth of my soul and also deepening into my humanness and earthiness. I mean, that's exciting work to me. And every time this parsha comes around of the Song of Songs, I get to go a little bit deeper with it.
So as you're describing some of this, and I'm glad that you sang, because it helps me frame in a certain way my question. Like, if I were to be fully bought into this, which I am, but then I would want to say, okay, how can I start chanting? Like, it would sound terrible, like I can't carry a tune, etc. And when I'm talking to you, I'm thinking, it feels to me like I'm having this conversation with, Bruce Springsteen, which in my book is like the most talented person I can imagine, right? So then I'm like, well, how does this conversation have to do with me? Is what you're describing, and what you and Lex were talking about earlier, are you describing a set of techniques and a set of practices that various kinds of leaders of spirituality can get really, really good at, and then create containers for other people like me to be participants in an experience in a new way? Or are there ways in which everybody ought to be doing this kind of thing that you're describing? But my question then is, if that's the answer, my question is, what do the people do who don't have the talent that you have? And I don't just mean that they can carry a tune. I mean that you obviously have a talent for coming into a room and knowing what's missing on a spiritual level, which, I would just come into the room and say, ugh, this party isn't so good, and I wouldn't know what to do.
But that's why you learn. Every week in synagogues, you read the Torah, and then at some point in the history of our people, they decided, it's not enough to read the Torah. We need a Haftarah. We need to read the prophets, because that's a really important part of our spiritual life as well. And I'm saying now we've come to a point in the evolution that we need to put love at the center. And so the Song of Songs gives us another pathway. And it's a direction that we all need to take. So when I first had this idea of this is how to put love at the center, really take the Song of Songs, 800 people signed up to receive an email from me every week. Some of them sing the chant and some of them don't, but they all receive this text that end with the challenge of, how can I live this? How do I bring this into my life? And this is generally my attitude towards Jewish texts, is I don't want to get smarter. I want to be able to say, how do I apply this to my life? Every line becomes very practical. It sends me on a journey. And it shows me the places I'm not there yet and what healing I need to do in order to get there. It's a modality of teaching Torah. And it's not for itself. There's some truth that wants to pour through me using a text as a vehicle, but I want to take that text off the page and put it into my heart and my body, and I want to live it. And so the chant helps me to do that. And I'm not interested in firming up my identity. At certain moments, I want that identity to dissolve and to know myself as a soul. And when I do that with people who are from all different traditions, it's an amazing experience of seeing how we all are on the same path and we're doing it in different ways. But the identities don't get in the way. And it feels like such a healing from this other place of that we are conditioned to see the other.
I'm curious. I mean, you had an incredible quick moment that folks could have missed that I find beautiful, which is you said every time of year when that parsha of Song of Songs comes around, you said that clause, which for almost everybody, may this not be true soon, but for almost everybody, the idea of a parsha, a Torah portion-like part of Song of Songs, is something they've never heard of. It's something that they would say, I guess you could do that, but, we haven't been doing it for thousands of years. Is that really a Jewish thing? But for you, you've done it, I don't know exactly how many years, but you've done it a few years. And so you now actually have a rhythm in your life of, yes, this time of year, I get to, these few verses in Song of Songs. And I have a rhythm, and I can actually reflect, even after 3 or 5 or whatever it is, of what it's like to have that feeling. So part of my question is, what is it to have a cyclical relationship to Song of Songs? I have a relationship to it, but I've never had a relationship that goes through seasonality that go in the way that Torah does. And part 2 of that question is, I want to say this for listeners. I just looked it up. Song of Songs is a total of 117 verses. So if you're splitting 117 verses over 52 portions, that's only a couple verses. That's 2 or 3 verses every time. That's very different from having, 4 chapters or whatever you normally have of Torah. That's even if you're doing sort of parallel acts, you've got a parsha on each side, on the Torah side, on the Song of Songs side. It's clearly different to spend 1 week in 2 verses than it is to spend 1 week in 4 chapters of text. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, what is that experience like?
It's exciting to me. It's really like finding my rhythm and feeling like that those 2 or 3 verses, I can live them, I can use them as an inquiry in order to do the work that needs to be done. I can immerse in it. So I love it. And I've been doing this for a few years now. And it feels like each time I come around, I get a little deeper into it. I mean, I also read commentaries. There's this wonderful edition that's from Michael Fishbane that is a translation and a Pardes commentary of the Song of Songs, which means every verse, it gives 4 different commentaries of the Song of Songs. The pshat, the literal meaning, the remez, what it's hinting at, the drash, kind of how it's used in Midrash, and then the sod, the secret meaning of it. And it's a compendium of mystics of the past who have been writing about the Song of Songs and using it as a central text. There's no end to, those two verses. I'll never find the bottom of it. I can keep diving deeper and deeper each week. And the melodies also help me to not just think about it, but really embody the text. I used to teach at Elat Chaim, and every year I would pick a text to teach in the summer, and I would spend the year immersing myself in that text. And it was a beautiful experience. But when I got to the Song of Songs, and I lived in that for a year, at the end of the year, I said, I don't want to leave. This is where I want to live. This is the place of pleasure and creativity and beauty and love. This is where I choose to live. What's central to Judaism is loving God, reality, with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my might, loving the stranger, loving the other as myself. That's the core of Jewish teachings for me. And so I might then call on lots of different texts that could help me on that path of love. But it seems like Judaism has sometimes gets so complicated and so many layers and commentaries on the commentaries on the commentaries that we forget what its purpose is to bring us to that place of love. I guess what I'm proposing for myself and for anybody who that speaks to is to say, put love back at the center. That's the most important thing. And so we're given this mystical text to be able to experience it, to get out of my head into this embodied sense of right here, right now.
Thank you so much, Shefa Gold, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
And thank you very much for engaging with me in this conversation. It's been my pleasure.
And thanks so much to all of you out there for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we hope that you'll tune in again in the future. Before we close out, we want to remind you that our Anya Shiva courses for spring of 2023, our 12-week full semester courses, begin in just a couple weeks at the beginning of February. You can learn more about all of them at judaismunbound.com/classes. And if you specifically know that after this wonderful episode you want to take Shefa Gold's course, just head to judaismunbound.com/love. That's the URL for her class. Obviously, that had to be the URL for her class. You heard the episode. Love at the center, judaismunbound.com/love if you want to register for her course. So another quick note, we're going to have some info sessions. If you're looking at our different course options, the one that Dan's teaching, the one I'm teaching, the one that Sarah Eifler's teaching, the one that Sarah Buna Menor's teaching, and Shefa Gold's, if you're looking at all those, you're having trouble deciding and you want to learn more information, or you just want to learn about what the Anya Shiva is exactly in a little more detail, have the chance to ask your own questions, we're going to have some info sessions this coming week meaning this episode comes out on Friday, January 20th. So this coming week will be the week after that. But our info sessions will be on Wednesday, January 25th and Thursday, January 26th. The Wednesday info session will be with me on the afternoon of the 25th at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, 11:30 a.m. Pacific. And for the info session on Thursday, the 26th, that'll be led by Dan, and that will be an evening info session at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And there's a link to sign up for either of these info sessions in the show notes for this episode, which you can find on our website. So sign up for either of those so you can ask your questions, learn more about our different course offerings, and more about the Anya Shiva in general. And also, we're going to be recording both of those. So if for any reason you're not able to attend, but you still want to watch them afterwards, you will be able to. So register in either case, and we will send out those recordings to everyone who's registered, whether they are able to attend in real time or not. So that's the closing note for today. We hope that you'll be in touch with us. You can do so via Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All of our handles are at Judaism Unbound. You can always email us at dan@judaismunbound.com or lex@judaismunbound.com. But with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.